and welcome to 2021. It's a new year and we've got a new space. We're so excited about it and we look forward to sharing more details with you soon. We will share a bit more on our Zoom church at 10 a.m. if you would like to join us. The link is in our newsletter each week. And if you're not yet signed up for the newsletter, go to our website, www.thewillowschurchsa.ca, and get signed up.
Now, speaking of changes, how are you coping with everything that's going on? Or maybe you're struggling with the sense of frustration that since the restrictions here have been extended for another month, that really nothing has changed.
Change is a natural part of life, but it's not always easy. And it's common for people to struggle with changing circumstances of life. It's also common for people who follow Christ to struggle with the power of those changing circumstances to affect their faith and their faith practices in a negative way. The extra stress and the rising anxiety comes with the territory as we move through changing circumstances. There are new situations to get used to and new problems to solve. And some people naturally tend to be early adopters of change, and they enjoy the adventure of changing circumstances, while others of us resist change at all costs. And now some of us find ourselves more frequently in the middle somewhere. We're resigned that change is inevitable, and so we try to graciously accept it, but it takes us a while to warm up. It takes time for us to adjust.
Now, King Solomon in his wisdom said that there was a time for everything under the sun. And for the Willows, God is blessing us with a change of location that will allow us to put down deeper roots in the community, to build new relationships, and to practice being good neighbors as we pursue our vision to embrace, enfold, and multiply. This is not the first move for the church. Early on, the church plant began meeting in a barn and in the township of Langley Chambers for a short while too. Then a couple of years of growth led to the move into R.C. Garner Elementary School, where for the last 10 years the Willows has been meeting, and some of you have been around the Willows a lot longer than we have. Now, over the coming weeks, we're asking you to dig around and poke through your stuff and find any photos that you may have. Or if you're willing to write down some of your memories about the good old days and the activities of the church, we really want to create a time capsule to mark our grand opening of the Willows Church and Family Life Centre. Now, if you're new to the Willows, we still want you to be involved in our time capsule project. So while you might not be a historian, you are the Willows of the present and of the future. And so we're looking for ways to capture your hopes and dreams so that we might leave a legacy of faith for the church to explore in the years ahead.
Change is less unsettling when we can see the big picture and not just the small microscopic universe of our own lives. And sometimes we fear that we won't be able to adjust, or that we'll be left behind, or that the pain of change will be too great. But as people of faith, we recognize that change doesn't only bring fear, anxiety, or stress. It also leads us to prayer and dependency on God. And we know that God has promised to never leave us or abandon us. So change doesn't confuse God or make it any more difficult for him to express care for his children. Change doesn't have to be a simply negative experience. Often in the process of change and upheaval, our relationship with God actually grows stronger. It's more intimate and more spiritually satisfying because we find ourselves grounded and rooted in the unchanging nature of God's love for us.
And so we need to keep the changes in our lives in proper perspective, not overestimating the impact of the changes we face, and putting our trust in God for the outcome of the changes in our lives. For he's in the business of transformation. And I believe God is doing an important and powerful maturing process in us all as we learn how to cope with the changing circumstances that are deepening rather than threatening our faith.
This morning we have a guest speaker, Lieutenant Erin Metcalf, a friend of ours, currently serving in Edmonton, Alberta, and she's going to bring us a message of hope from Psalm 23, which is a favorite passage of many. Allow yourself to enter into an experience of worship today through song, study, and reflection.
just and good. I want to trust in you, and in all I do, bring you honor and praise. Be my guide for the road ahead, and should I feel misled, you are just and good. I want to trust in you, and in all I do, bring you honor and praise. How I love you, great and mighty. You are faithful through the ages. You never change. How I love you, great and mighty. You are faithful through the ages. You never change. You are faithful through the ages. You never change. You are faithful through the ages. You never change.
Hi Willows Church, I'm Lieutenant Erin Metcalf, and my husband Curtis and I are the DYSs in Alberta and Northern Territories. And I've been invited to share a word with you this morning, and I'm excited to be part of your worship this morning. I just want to speak very, very briefly about just what we've come through. 2020 was a year, right? It was a bit of a year, and we've all experienced it in different ways, but also collectively, it's been a year that's been full of grief, of loss, of uncertainty. One of the main themes that's been woven throughout conversations that I've had with people, in work, in life, my friendships, my family relationships are, I'm just so unsure. I don't know. There's this unknowing. I'm not sure how to move forward. How can I plan? It's all so unknown. I'm not sure what's going to happen next week, next month, in 6 months. Where will we be? What will life look like? That's been kind of the common theme that's woven through most of my conversations, and with good reason. It's been very challenging. We've lost certain things. Either we've lost people, very deep grief for people who've lost loved ones to COVID or other illnesses throughout this season, job loss, just loss of connection and community. It's been heavy. And so we stand at the cusp of a new year, and we want to hope for something better. And there's a vaccine, and it's hopeful, and it's exciting. But we're still in the middle of it. We're still in the middle of this unknown, right? And so I wanted to sort of just share with you some thoughts that I have, trying to tie that in a bit together with some scripture. And at the beginning part of COVID, I really was reading a lot of the Psalms. I found that they brought me comfort in a way that just other scripture was not speaking to me quite the same way. And so I kept coming to Psalm 23. And Psalm 23 is a psalm that's very, very familiar to us. Of course, it's read often at funerals because it brings comfort. It speaks to us deeply. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. They're familiar words. And we've just come through Christmas, so we've probably all heard messages about shepherds, and we understand their lifestyle, and we understand that they were the lowly ones. They were out in the field with the sheep. They worked hard. They worked long hours. It is a difficult job to be a shepherd. They had to walk sometimes for hundreds of miles to just make sure their sheep were fed and watered. They didn't have sleeping bags or cots. They weren't carting around their, $700 Mountain Equipment Co-op sleeping bag and tent and cot. They had just the robes they wore, and they had a dangerous job. And if you recall in Samuel, David talks about rescuing a sheep from the mouth of the lion or the bear when one would come along and try to steal away one of his sheep. Very real threats, dangerous threats to the sheep. And it was the shepherd's job to protect them. Shepherding was not glamorous. It was hard. It was 365 days a year. It was their entire life, right? You didn't work part-time as a shepherd or do it for a little while and then move on to something different. You were a shepherd. That was what you did. That was your life. And if you were a shepherd, you cared for your sheep. That's it. That's the job. You made sure your sheep were safe and well looked after, and that was about it. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. What does it mean to lack nothing? To really lack nothing? What would it look like what would it look like in our lives if we truly believed that we lacked nothing because the Lord is our shepherd? The words are so familiar, right? He leads me to green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. I wonder if the words have become so familiar that they've lost their profound impact on us, the deep meaning. A few years ago, I did a funeral for a woman, and her kids did not want any God stuff in the service at all. And so I said, okay, that's no problem. Talked to them for a little while, got to know them, got to know stuff about their mom. And at the end of the conversation, after a couple of days, they said, you know what, you could throw something churchy in it if you wanted. And so I said, okay, well, let me think about it. And I ended up reading Psalm 23. And at the end of the service, the son came up to me and he said, can I have that poem that you read, the one about the pastures and the water and the valley of death? And I said, oh, Psalm 23. Yes, I will get you a copy of that. There's something in those words that speaks to us deeply. It draws us in and it comforts us, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And while I don't want to take away from any of that, those images that this psalm conjures up for you, I do want to suggest that maybe the psalm has a slightly different meaning. See, I think we've gotten used to this picture of Jesus standing in a lush field, perhaps leaning on a tree with a sheep in his arm, other sheep grazing about in beautiful green grass and a brook, running by. We probably have that picture because it hangs in a lot of churches. Everything is just so green and lush and easy looking and peaceful. But the reality is the context of Psalm 23 was really more like a rocky, barren landscape. In the Middle East, the landscape was not lush all the time. There were farmers' fields, of course, that were perhaps more lush, green, like the vineyards and farms that you would see in maybe BC in some of the valleys there. But that was not the green pastures that were reserved for shepherds and their flocks. The shepherds were lowly, they were poor, they were nomadic. They didn't have lush fields. The actual landscape for most shepherds looked like a rocky hillside with chunks of rock and stones and sand and dirt and dust. And along the hillside and along the pathways edged into the sides of the slopes were pathways that the sheep would just sort of walk along. And then there would be these tufts of green grass and they would poke up all over the place. And so the sheep would go from one tuft of grass to another tuft of grass, and then they'd move along and they'd eat a tuft of grass and then they'd move along. And it was the shepherd's job to lead the sheep across this rough, rocky terrain slowly so that they could munch on these little tufts of grass. The rocky hillside with these little bits and pieces of grass is actually what was known in this region in biblical times as green pastures. Is your perception of Psalm 23 beginning to change just a little bit? The shepherds were providing the sheep with everything they needed for that moment to satisfy their immediate need. The picture is not of a shepherd leading his sheep to an abundant field where they could feed until they burst and sleep comfortably only to wake again and eat in abundance the next day. No, that's not the picture. It was about trusting the shepherd to meet their immediate need and keep them safe in that moment. See, Jesus knew his Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, He didn't use the metaphor of being a good shepherd lightly. He uses this metaphor in John 10 when he says, I am the good shepherd. The Gospel of John is full of I am statements. Each statement provides us with a glimpse into who Jesus is. And in John 10, Jesus says, I am the gate for the sheep. And he says, I am the good shepherd. So in Psalm 23, the psalmist is saying, the Lord being Yahweh, God, is my shepherd. I lack nothing. And then here in the Gospel of John, Jesus the Messiah, Emmanuel, God with us, he says, I am the good shepherd. Jesus is Lord. Jesus himself tells us he is the good shepherd. And when we see what it actually meant for the sheep to trust their shepherds, when we understand that green pastures were rocky, difficult places with just enough grass tufts to sustain the animals, then we can begin to really understand that trusting Jesus, trusting him so we lack nothing, maybe looks different than expecting a whole lot of good and abundance and ease to come flowing our way. Our perception of green pastures has to change. Jesus doesn't lead us into plentiful fields of abundance, does he? That's certainly not been my experience. No, he cares for us. He meets our needs. He loves us. Not our wants, our desires, our pleasures. He doesn't lead us into places of ease and bounty all the time. No, our good shepherd provides what we need each and every hour, every season, every month, every week, every day. When we constantly put our trust in him, when we trust him to sustain us, no matter how difficult our situation is, no matter what kind of place we find ourselves in, he provides what we need so we lack nothing. Jesus tells us he is our good shepherd because he knows the terrain. He knows how much the sheep had to trust their shepherd, to follow their shepherd. Their needs were only just met. They lived and were sustained on trust alone. Little tufts of grass, sustenance found amongst the rocky and rough terrain, would carry them through. That's all. As we head into 2021, there is uncertainty. We're not sure what it is going to look like. Maybe it still looks pretty rocky. But along the way, there's tufts of green grass, of sustenance. And we trust that Jesus, as our good shepherd, will lead us to those places and sustain us. Give us what we need in the moment. Make sure that we are cared for and loved and protected. Not necessarily given all the abundance, but given what we're needed, what we need to sustain us. The metaphor that Jesus says is, I am the good shepherd, the shepherd who leads us to a place where we lack nothing, the good shepherd who knows his sheep, and his sheep know him. Trust him, follow him, because if we don't, we just won't survive. We'll miss the life-sustaining bits of grace that pop up when we find ourselves walking once again through a desert. Thank you for listening. And I wish you a wonderful 2021.
In the process, in the waiting, you're making melodies over me. And your presence is the promise. For I am a pilgrim on a journey. You will lift my head above the mighty waves. You are able to keep me from stumbling. In my weakness, you are the strength that comes from within. Shepherd of my soul, take my hand and lead me on. You make my footsteps and my path secure. on water is just the beginning. Cause my faith to arise, stand at attention. For you are calling me to greater things. You will lift my head above the mighty waves. You are able to keep me from stumbling. In my weakness, you are the strength that comes from within. Shepherd of my soul, take my hand and lead me on. How I love you, how I love you. You have not forsaken me. How I love you, how I love you. You is where I want to be. How I love you, how I love you. You have not forsaken me. How I love you, how I love you. You is where I want to be. You will lift my head above the mighty waves. You are able to keep me from stumbling. In my weakness, you are the strength that comes from within. Shepherd of my soul, take my hand and lead me on. Good shepherd of my soul.